live in interesting times. Today's stories. In Syria, NGOs urgently call for a cessation of hostilities in Idlib. Panama reacts to its inclusion on EU's tax haven blacklist. In Burundi, Truth and Reconciliation Commission continues digging mass graves. A minister says Uganda releases 13 Rwandan nationals as a gesture of goodwill. Tough weather kills 48,000 hectare crops in central Colombia. Pompeo closes his Africa tour with a warning about China's, quote, empty promises. U.S. sanctions Russia's Rosneft subsidiary, warns of further pressure. Guaido calls victory the U.S. sanction against the Russian oil subsidiary. Pompeo says the U.S. plans to provide at least $100 million worth of coronavirus support. Plus, for ABC Sports, hockey scores big among youth of Filipino descent in Canada. This is Eagle News coming to you from Las Vegas, bringing you stories from around the globe. I'm Anna Kui. Now for the details. Syrian NGOs gather in Istanbul to call for a cessation of hostilities in Idlib as hundreds of thousands of people flee the advance of the regime forces.
People sort of are living a very indignified existence with just out exposed to the elements, limitations on where people can sleep. There's a lot of movement from place to place because of the aerial bombardments and the attacks, and so essentially we're looking at major displacements over the next few months unless there is a cessation of those hostilities.
Regime forces, they are going very close to the main road which will take you to the Bab al-Hawa, and if they reach Bab al-Hawa, so the main point to cross the humanitarian support and the commodities either from the commercial border to Idlib will be lost, and that will be like a catastrophe within the catastrophe itself.
Turkey and Russia exchanged warnings on Wednesday after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan threatened an imminent operation in Syria to end the regime's brutal assault on the last rebel enclave. Syrian aid workers called urgently for a ceasefire and international help for nearly 1 million people fleeing the regime onslaught in the country's northwestern Idlib province, the biggest wave of displaced civilians in the 9-year conflict. Turkey, a supporter of some rebel groups in Idlib, had been pushing for a renewed ceasefire in talks with Russia, which backs the Syrian regime. Ankara is eager to prevent another flood of refugees into its territory, adding to the 3.7 million Syrians it already hosts. The Syrian NGO Alliance said displaced people are escaping in search of safety, only to die from extreme weather conditions and lack of available resources. Razan Safour of the Syrian Expatriate Medical Association said at the press conference in Istanbul, quote, "We have hundreds and thousands of people who are fleeing, not just from bombardments, but from the lack of insulation, from the weather, a lack of heating. It feels like doomsday."
I have no idea. I have no idea where the people are going to end up going. We have no idea if Turkey's going to be able to open their borders. We have no idea if the EU is going to step in to help. All we know is that right now we have hundreds and thousands of people who are fleeing, hundreds of thousands of people who are dying, not just from bombardment, but also from lack of insulation, also from the weather, a lack of heating, and it feels like doomsday, essentially.
The group said a total of $336 million was needed for basic food, water, and shelter. Education resources were also needed for 280 million displaced school-aged children. Erdogan said talks with Moscow over the past fortnight had so far failed to achieve the desired result and warned that Turkey would launch an offensive into Syria unless Damascus pulled its forces back by the end of the month. Erdogan said in a televised speech, quote, "An operation in Idlib is imminent. We are counting down. We are making our final warnings. He called for Syrian forces to retreat behind Turkey's military posts in Idlib, which were set up under a 2018 deal with Russia designated to hold off a regime advance. The Kremlin quickly responded to Erdogan's threat, warning that any operation against Syrian forces would be the worst scenario. With Turkey moving large numbers of reinforcements into Idlib in recent weeks, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar emphasized that it was, quote, out of the question for us to withdraw from our observation posts. He told reporters in Ankara, quote, if there is any sort of attack against them, we will retaliate in kind. Panama's president and the president of the Chamber of Commerce say the country does not agree with the European Union's decision to put Panama back on its blacklist of tax havens, saying the country had not done enough to meet global transparency standards.
Que vengan a Panamá y que hagan esa evaluación para que puedan ver todo lo que se ha avanzado. Por eso nosotros no estamos de acuerdo con la inclusión de Panamá en esa lista y esperamos que en la próxima revisión podamos salir de la misma prontamente.
The EU on Tuesday put Panama back on its blacklist of tax havens after deciding the country had not done enough to meet global transparency standards. The Council of the EU said in a statement following a meeting of the bloc's finance ministers, Panama, along with the Cayman Islands, Seychelles, and Palau, were added to 8 other territories already deemed to be non-cooperative tax jurisdiction. They joined American Samoa, Fiji, Guam, Oman, Samoa, Trinidad and Tobago, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Vanuatu on the list. Panama's President Laurentino Cortizo blasted the EU decision as arbitrary that failed to take into account the greater effort his country had made to pass laws against money laundering and tax evasion.
Esa lista es arbitraria. Nosotros estamos haciendo todo el esfuerzo y lo seguiremos haciendo para salir de todas las listas. Le vamos a solicitar a la Unión Europea que nos escuche, que escuche a Panamá para que vea todo el esfuerzo que se ha estado haciendo, especialmente en estos 7 meses.
Cortizo told reporters in Panama City, quote, we asked the governments of Europe, such as France and other governments, to look at Panama. I am not looking for a favor, but that they measure us as they are measuring other countries and not be arbitrary. The addition of the Cayman Islands represented the first time an overseas British territory was placed on the EU's blacklist. One German conservative member in the European Parliament, Markus Ferber, said that should serve as a warning to the United Kingdom following its departure last month from the European Union. In other news, the chairman of the Burundi Truth and Reconciliation Commission says that the time has not yet come to speak about the ethnic identity of the victims buried on the banks of the Ruvubu River. Burundi's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC, claims to have already unearthed more than 6,000 distinct human remains from multiple ethnic groups on the banks of the river on the border between Gitega and Karuzi provinces.
Uko twimbale tuca tuguma tubona ivu ricanganye iryo hejuru n'iryagataka ni ukuvuga riba ridasa tugumye twimba rero tuca dusanga abantu bariyo nkaha turiko turaterasi aha hose turabona ko abantu bariyo kuko urabona nkaha naho ugira gutya ivu ryaho riracanganije n'ubwoko bubi.
Nous considérons que avant les enquêtes approfondies, avant l'écoute des témoins, avant les audiences publiques comme le prévoit la loi, avant les audiences à huis clos comme le prévoit la loi, la CVR s'interdit d'étiqueter les victimes sur base ethnique. Il y a le vocabulaire de fausses communes renseignées, nous sommes au nombre de 18. Mais il y a ce que nous appelons les fausses communes confirmées. Nous sommes actuellement au nombre de 8 et parmi les 8, les 6 ont été déjà préparés, excavés, vidés et nous entamons maintenant la 7e et la 8e fosse commune.
Ugandan Foreign Affairs Minister Sam Kutesa says during a press conference in Kampala, Uganda releases 13 Rwandan nationals that were facing charges of espionage and security-related offenses, criminal activity, and illegal possession of firearms as a gesture of goodwill.
As a further gesture of goodwill, the government of Uganda has decided to release 13 more Rwandan nationals in addition to the 9 that were released on the 8th of January 2020. And most importantly, it is Uganda's expectation that Rwanda too will reciprocate the goodwill gesture by addressing the concerns that Uganda has raised, including people being detained and including still incarcerated in Rwanda, within the Rwanda framework, which requires immediate action. We are doing what we hope that will be reciprocated and will lead to normalization of relations. We are not saying people are innocent. We are just saying we want to clear the way to normalize the relations.
Meanwhile, a layer of frost covers dry crops in central Colombia, where worried farmers are lamenting this year's particularly strong damage, one which experts say is not due to climate change.
Por la mañana es bajas temperaturas, eso uno se levanta y eso es blanco como si estuviera uno por allá en la nieve, y ya a horas de las 10, 11 de la mañana eso, la temperatura es brava, y ahorita por las tardes el aire, esto queda, estamos graves, eso queda todo se está perdiendo.
Están abortando mucho las vacas debido al cambio climático. Primero esos soles tan fuertes, después esas heladas tan duras, entonces eso está afectando al ganadito, que las vaquitas que están premiadas abortan con ese problema.
Tenemos, digamos, 150.000 hectáreas de producción agrícola en esta zona del departamento. De esas 150.000 tenemos ya 48.000 afectadas, lo cual es bastante alto. Y eso nos ha, digamos, afectado también directamente a 13.500 productores, que entre otras cosas son especialmente pequeños y medianos productores.
Es normal que para esta época del año se nos presenten estos descensos de las temperaturas del aire en el país, y especialmente en zonas por encima de los 2.400 metros de altura, y más aún cuando las condiciones están despejadas en horas de las madrugadas.
Up next, Pompeo closes his Africa tour with a warning about China's, quote, empty promises. U.S. sanctions Russia's Rosneft subsidiary, warns of further pressure. Guaido calls victory the U.S. sanction against the Russian oil subsidiary. Pompeo says the U.S. plans to provide at least $100 million worth of coronavirus support. Plus, for EBC Sports, hockey scores big among youth of Filipino descent in Canada. Eagle News will be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Eagle News coming to you from Las Vegas. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Wednesday closed a three-nation Africa tour with a thinly veiled swipe at China as he talked up Washington's ability to stimulate growth and entrepreneurship on the continent.
Countries should be wary of authoritarian regimes with empty promises. They breed corruption, dependency. They don't hire the local people. They don't train. They don't lead them. They run the risk that the prosperity and sovereignty and progress that Africa so needs and desperately wants won't happen. If there's one thing you should know about our president, my boss, you should know that he loves deals. He wants more to happen. He wants more to happen between the United States and nations all across Africa.
Pompeo in his remarks did not explicitly mention China, Africa's largest trading partner, but analysts predicted ahead of his trip that he would attempt to pitch the U.S. as an alternative source of investment. On Wednesday, Pompeo name-checked U.S. companies operating in all three countries on his Africa tour, the first by a U.S. cabinet-level official in 19 months. Bechtel in Senegal, Chevron in Angola, and Coca-Cola in Ethiopia. He also hailed the free market, generally blasting failed socialist experiments of years past in places like Zimbabwe and Tanzania. And he criticized a purposed constitutional amendment in South Africa that would allow private property to be expropriated without compensation, a plan that seeks to overcome inequalities set down in the apartheid era. He said the amendment would be, quote, disastrous for that economy and, most importantly, for the South African people. U.S. Special Representative for Venezuela Elliott Abrams announces sanctions against Rosneft Trading, a subsidiary of the Russian state-controlled oil giant, over its continued trade with Venezuela, and warns of more steps and further pressure in the coming weeks and months.
Today, the United States sanctioned Rosneft Trading S.A. and its chairman, Didier Casimiro. As Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said, quote, Rosneft Trading S.A. brokered global oil deals involving the sale and transport of Venezuelan crude to provide a lifeline to the illegitimate Maduro regime. Today's sanctions are another step in the policy of pressuring the Maduro regime to allow Venezuela to escape from its terrible crisis through free and fair presidential elections. There will be more steps and further pressure in the coming weeks and months. There's no indication yet that they are seriously contemplating allowing the one step that would allow Venezuela to emerge from this crisis, a free and fair presidential election.
The United States on Tuesday announced sanctions against a subsidiary of Russian state-controlled oil giant Rosneft over its continued trade with Venezuela, in defiance of Washington's attempt to break leftist President Nicolas Maduro's grip on power. Officials in President Donald Trump's administration said Rosneft Trading S.A. and Rosneft Trading Vice President Didier Casimiro were targeted in the latest measures. One official, speaking on condition of not being identified, called Rosneft Trading S.A., quote, the prime culprit in helping Maduro escape the effect of U.S. economic sanctions. He said this is, quote, sending a message that he will not stand idly by as foreign extracontinental or other entities help the Maduro regime maintain and sustain its repression. The official said, quote, Rosneft Trading has been the overwhelming provider of trading in the Maduro regime oil and has provided the overwhelming amount of financial resources and hard currency that has been coming into the Maduro regime. Therefore, this action should have a significant impact on the Maduro regime. Another administration official, who also asked not to be named, said that the sanctions would hit Rosneft Trading as a business in the United States, but also send ripple effects through the company's wider activities. The official said, quote, the designation of Rosneft Trading and Didier Casimiro means that anyone outside the United States runs the risk of being sanctioned themselves. One of the administration officials briefing reporters said Moscow's support for the Maduro government is having huge consequences for them. The official said the United States is determined to bring down Maduro through its maximum pressure campaign, which currently is at 50 to 60%. Responding to a question of whether the United States could ever carry out a military campaign in Venezuela, the official said, quote, we hope never to have to get to 100% of maximum pressure. Despite U.S. sanctions and Washington's recognition of opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela, Maduro and his military backers retain a tight grip. More than 50 countries have joined the United States in recognizing Guaido, saying that Maduro's 2018 re-election was rigged. But Maduro has survived in large part thanks to economic, military, and diplomatic backing from Russia, as well as support from China and communist Cuba. Earlier this month, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited Caracas, where he said U.S. sanctions were illegal and, quote, the main cause of the crisis in the Venezuelan economy. Maduro on Monday accused Trump of plotting an invasion and said, quote, we are not afraid of military combat, and we are going to guarantee peace. Opposition leader Juan Guaido celebrates as a victory the sanctions announced by the United States against a subsidiary of Russian state-controlled oil giant Rosneft over its key role in Venezuela. In a tweet, Guaido said, as translated into English, quote, "The Russian oil company Rosneft Trading SA has been sanctioned for being complicit in a dictatorship. This news is a victory. Whoever supports the dictator, whoever they are, wherever they come from, must bear the consequences. Those who collaborate with democracy will be welcomed." In other news, while on a visit to Ethiopia, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo comments on the outbreak of the new coronavirus and U.S. plans to provide funds to support countries around the world.
I heard just as I came in that there are now more reported cases here in Africa. We need to make sure that we've got that right, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that every place there's risk in countries where there isn't a deep, strong healthcare or public health infrastructure, the United States is providing important assistance. We've got plans to put in place at least $100 million worth of support to countries all around the world, including to China. We're proud of that. We hope that the world will unite against what is this really challenging public health problem that faces us.
And now for EBC Sports. Here's a sports story with a bit of a twist. A growing number of young people of Filipino descent in Canada have adopted the national sport of their adopted country. And as Eagle News correspondent Thomas I. Likeness tells us, one of these players has also followed the practice of many professional athletes who use their sport to share their beliefs. Take a look.
Most people think basketball is the sport of Filipinos, but here in the Canadian city of Edmonton, b-ball has a rival. It seems that hockey is a hit among young people from the Philippines. 12-year-old Ryan Belisi has been playing organized hockey for 2 years now. Ryan says his interest in the game came naturally.
I think it was really just me growing up in an environment. Well, I think I went to tons of hockey games as a very small kid, so maybe when I was a baby, so.
Now, Ryan is not alone on the ice. He says there's a growing number of Filipino Canadians shooting pucks.
But there's a lot of good Filipino hockey players, but it's not just basketball that we play, but it's a variety of sports. It's not just those sports that we're all traditionally used to, like volleyball and basketball. It's also things like hockey, but.
Ryan has combined his love of sports with something else, as evidenced by this logo on his helmet.
It's just the INC sticker, and it's the logo, and I hope to represent INC at all times when I'm playing on the ice.
INC stands for Iglesia ni Cristo, or Church of Christ, the church to which Ryan belongs. What was his motivation?
Because anything is possible with God, right? So, without him, I can't play as well, but I can't do a lot of things that I can do today, so.
Hockey, like other sports, can lead to college scholarships for players who excel at the game. Is this in Ryan's future?
Yeah. With God's mercy, anything can happen, so.
Tonight's game didn't go so well. The Sabres lost 7-6.
It was a good battle till the end, but they just came out on top.
Hockey is becoming a family affair for the Belisis. Ryan's younger brother, CJ, he's pictured here with the rest of the family, is also in organized hockey. Although Ryan loves the game of hockey, he's embraced something far more important. He stands up for what he believes and is freely willing to share it. In Edmonton, Thomas I. Likeness, Eagle News, 1/25.
Thanks, Thomas. That is today's Eagle News. Join us again tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our websites at eaglenews.net and eaglenewslive.com. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/eaglenews and on Facebook at facebook.com/eaglenews. Thank you for watching. I'm Anna Kui, 1/25.